I always thought I was doing everything right: work hard, save every penny, be responsible. That's what grown-ups do, right? At least that's what I'd been telling myself for the last 10 years, working 60-hour weeks at my accounting firm, never allowing myself a moment's rest, never allowing myself a day off, as if I were trying to earn not just a house but also the respect I'd always lacked. My name is Hannah Mitchell, I'm 30, I'm single, and just 2 weeks ago, with trembling hands, I finally signed the papers to officially own my own place. Words I repeated to myself, barely holding back tears, because this was not just a house, it was a symbol of my independence, my adulthood, my victory. When my grandmother died, and it was suddenly, quietly, in her favorite chair by the window, overlooking the garden where daisies always bloomed, she left me a modest inheritance, not a huge amount of money to change my life upside down, but significant enough to cover part of the cost of the apartment and make the journey to the dream I had been fighting for years a little easier. I started saving money back when I got my first job at 22. It wasn't the office of my dreams, but a noisy, stuffy corner on the 4th floor of an old building with no elevator, but it was my launching pad. I lived in a tiny one-room apartment, saving at every step, carrying lunches in plastic containers, turning down all the trips that my friends went on them in bright swimsuits against the backdrop of the Bali sunsets. Me in the office, with tired eyes and a summary of quarterly reports. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy! While everyone else was posting beach pics and showing off their new Michael Kors bags on social media, I was working nights, picking up extra shifts, and putting every extra dollar into my savings account. And so, when it finally hit $300,000, a number that had been in my mind like a benchmark for the past 5 years, I didn't hesitate for a second and bought the apartment I'd been dreaming about since my first visit. No mortgage, no debt, just me and my home, a 1-bedroom apartment, just a 10-minute walk from my office, in a neighborhood that wasn't exactly hip yet, but it felt alive, moving, and full of potential. The previous owners had some weird taste, to say the least. The wallpaper in the living room resembled Grandma's mothballed closet, and the kitchen looked like it was designed by someone who'd never cooked at home, but all of that was fixable. To save money, I decided to do the renovation myself, inspired by dozens of hours of YouTube tutorials that replaced my evening TV series. And so, one such evening, I was wearing a dusty t-shirt and holding a spatula in my hands, peeling off another strip of ugly floral wallpaper, when my phone suddenly vibrated. It was my mother. "Hannah, honey, I need you to come to a family gathering next Saturday," she said with that special intonation of hers, where a slight casualness betrays a carefully planned idea. Tearing myself away from the wall and wiping sweat from my forehead, I asked sullenly, "A family gathering? What's going on?" Suspicion, like an icy drop, slowly rolled inside. "Oh, it's a surprise, just be there by 4, and bring one of those chocolate cakes from the bakery near your new place," she continued, clearly trying to sound casual, but I knew that manner of hers. She used it when she was hiding something. "Mom, seriously, what's going on?" I pressed, excitement rising in my chest. "Just a little family get-together. Your sister's going to be there with Kevin. I invited aunts, uncles, cousins." The words came fast, as if she were trying to drown out my questions with a flood of unnecessary information. I froze. "The whole extended family? For what?" "It's a secret, Hannah, a surprise. Just be here," she said, and before I could ask another question, the line went dead. I was left standing there, phone in hand, putty knife in hand, peering at the bright pink buds on the wallpaper, and shrugged, going back to work. Whatever she was planning, Lily's wedding, a surprise anniversary, some other parental prank, clearly could wait. I had a goal: getting this house in order. My sister, Lily, is 3 years younger than me, at 27, and has been dating Kevin for about 4 years. They live in a rented apartment in the heart of the city, in the kind of neighborhood where a latte costs the equivalent of dinner for 2, and they always seem to have it easy. Unlike me, Lily seemed born to go with the flow. She was a cheerleader when I was proud of my place on the debate team. She dropped out of college to find myself, while I spent all nights over spreadsheets, and the most amazing thing is that our parents never reproached her. As children, her name was heard in our house more often than mine, as if she were the center and I was the background. When we both signed up for dance and had performances on the same weekend, guess whose performance our parents went to? Lily's, of course. When we graduated high school, she had a big party for her graduation, with banners and balloons and a bunch of guests. When I graduated from college, proudly and with honors, we went to Olive Garden, and I still remember my 16th birthday, a modest used bike that I treasured, of course, but couldn't help but compare to what Lily got the following year, a car. She needs to go to community events, my parents said, as if my debate tournaments, trips to the animal shelter, and volunteering at the library weren't equally important. But I never made a scene. It wasn't in my nature to slam doors or scream for justice. I just worked harder, saved more, learned to be tougher and calmer, proving not only to others but perhaps most of all to myself that I was perfectly capable of taking care of myself without making a fuss, without crying or complaining, without asking for help. The week after that call flew by like a draft between the old walls of my new apartment. I plunged into the renovation headlong, feeling how with each piece of old wallpaper removed, with each stroke of the brush on the primer, I seemed to be cleaning out all the accumulated resentment, fatigue and old omissions. I managed to remove everything, down to the last scrap of paper, and begin priming the walls for painting, and that special feeling of satisfaction when I looked back at the fresh, white walls, shining from the not yet dry paint, was worth every scratch and callus that appeared on my palms. On Saturday, I woke up early. The sun had barely had time to rise, but I was already impatient to finish painting the living room before getting ready to go to my parents'. I wanted to finish what I had started, as if emphasizing to myself that I was the mistress of my life, my time, my decisions. I stopped at the same bakery near my house. The smell of chocolate and vanilla, like a hug from childhood, enveloped the entire small shop, and chose my mother's favorite cake. Thick, dark chocolate with creamy icing, carefully decorated with swirls, just the way she liked. As I drove along the familiar route to my parents' house, to the house that once belonged to my grandmother and which was now registered to me and Lily, I couldn't help but think, what was all this for? What kind of surprise could require the presence of the whole family and a cake? The house greeted me with a serene appearance, two-story, colonial style, with sea-green shutters and white window frames. It seemed frozen in time, just as I remembered it as a child. Lily and I never argued about who would get it. It was somehow decided that my parents would continue to live there, and the idea of /U200B/U200 nothing else seemed blasphemous. It was full of memories, scattered, warm and painful at the same time, like old postcards from the past. I pulled up to the curb and immediately noticed the parked cars, familiar license plates, recognizable shapes, Uncle Steve's truck, Aunt Karen's minivan, even Cousin Derek's motorcycle leaning against the garage, just like when he used to sneak out on it. I took a deep breath, clutched the cake box to my chest as if it were a shield, and opened the door. "Hannah's here," came my mother's voice from inside, the same voice that had once called us to dinner, to stories by the fire, to toast the new year. She hugged me quickly, as if she were afraid that if she lingered even a second she would reveal more than she intended, and deftly plucked the cake from my hands. "Perfect timing, we're just about to sit down," she said with the same forced cheerfulness that had been in her voice on the phone. The living room was a comfortable bustle. Lily and Kevin were sitting on the couch, their hands intertwined, their heads tilted toward each other as if they were sharing some incredible secret in whispers, while my father was talking quietly to Uncle Steve in the corner and Aunt Karen was already heading into the dining room with the children. "What's going on?" I asked Lily, walking up to her, holding back my impatience. She just smiled mysteriously. "You'll see." That smile, light and meaningful, only increased the anxiety tugging at my insides. I followed everyone into the dining room, and as soon as I saw the china, the one with the blue flowers around the edges that Mom only took out for Thanksgiving and Christmas, I knew that whatever was planned was important. I sat down next to Derek, and he seemed as confused as I was. "Do you know what this is about?" I whispered. He shook his head, sighing. "I have no idea. Your mom just said she had something to announce." The food was passed around: potatoes, mashed potatoes, green beans, and, of course, my chocolate cake took its place of honor in the center of the table. Everyone pretended it was a normal family dinner, jokes, reminiscing, cautious compliments, but the tension hung in the air like thunder before a storm. And then, when everyone had filled their plates and was eating, Mom stood up. She tapped her glass lightly with her spoon, making it jingle, and everyone fell silent. "I want to thank you all for coming today," she said, beaming as if she had won the lottery. we have some wonderful news to share with you." She stood at the head of the table, her smile unnaturally wide as she looked at Lily, and I already knew it was about her. "Our dear Lily is pregnant," Mom announced. And at that very moment the room was filled with cheers, applause, laughter. "Congratulations, Lily." Flushed, Kevin put his arm around her shoulders, and I caught her eye across the table and smiled tightly. "Congratulations, Lily," I said, and despite our differences, I was genuinely, truly happy for her at that moment. But Mom wasn't finished. She glanced briefly at Dad and Lily, and then, taking a step to the side, turned to face me. Her face suddenly changed, from radiant to tense, and her eyes took on the caution with which one usually communicates something painful. "That's not all," she said, her voice cutting through the general hubbub, and the room went silent, as if someone had suddenly turned off the sound. Everyone turned to look at me. Mom took a breath and spoke. "As you all know, Hannah recently bought herself an apartment." She nodded in my direction, the family began nodding, and someone muttered a congratulatory note that they had clearly not bothered to say 2 weeks ago when I shared the news. "Hannah is 30 and single," my mother continued, and at that moment, I felt the blood rush to my cheeks, hot and heavy. What does my marital status have to do with all this? The question flashed in my head like the flash of an old camera, painfully bright, tearing me out of the paralyzing numbness I had fallen into since hearing my mother's words. But before I could say anything, my mother continued, her voice soft, almost oily. "Lily is going to start a family. She and Kevin need their own place, not some rented apartment." My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, in my temples, even in my fingers, as if my body knew where this conversation was going before my mind had a chance to process it. I glanced at Lily and Kevin, who were sitting there with their eyes down, staring intently at their plates, as if they could provide the answers they needed. My mother turned to me, and her smile, which had been wide and carefree, suddenly turned into something else entirely, cold and sharp, like a knife in the ribs. "Hannah, this is your chance to show how much you love your sister. How generous and kind you are." She paused, as if she hoped I would be happy to follow her lead, but instead I just sat there, stunned, unable to believe that this was all actually happening. "I think you should give your new apartment to Lily and Kevin," my mother said, as easily as if she were asking someone to lend a book or watch their dog. The dining room went deafeningly quiet. I looked at my mother, waiting, pleading, to hear that this was just a joke, a prank, that she would laugh, say it was a test, but the silence dragged on, and the joke never came. "You can go back to renting," my mother said casually, as if she weren't asking me to give up the $300,000 apartment I'd paid for with years of effort, rejection, sleepless nights, and wasted weekends. "You don't need all that space to yourself." I glanced around the table. My father nodded, as if his agreement meant something more than silent capitulation. Lily finally looked up at me, her eyes a mixture of shame, confusion, and anticipation. "That's a great idea," Aunt Karen chimed in, her voice cheerful, as if she were approving of a great casserole recipe. "Family always comes first." Several other relatives nodded without looking at me, as if they'd memorized their lines. This wasn't improv, it was a staged scene, an ambush. "You can't be serious," I finally managed, my voice shaking but full of tension, like a wire about to snap. "Of course I am," my mother replied, and there was no softness left in her voice now. "Your sister needs this more than you do." I stood up slowly, the chair creaking back, breaking the tense silence. "Let me get this straight," I began, trying to maintain control even as my insides churned. "You want me to give Lily my apartment? The apartment I worked 60 hours a week to buy for years? The apartment I bought with money from my grandmother, the one I loved more than anyone in the world, and that I saved for 8 years, denying myself everything? You want me to just give it away just because Lily got pregnant?" "Hannah," my father's voice dropped sharply, his eyes hard, "don't be selfish." "Selfish?" I laughed, short and harsh, but even to my ears it sounded hollow and hollow. "I worked for this apartment, every dollar, every sleepless night, every stab of back pain from overtime. It was all my work. No one helped me, no one offered." "But Lily needs," my mother began, but I interrupted her for the first time in years. "No, absolutely not. I'm not giving my apartment to Lily. It's mine, I deserve it." Lily began to cry, dramatically pressing her hand to her still flat stomach, and Kevin grimaced at me as if I'd just said I hated children. "How can you be so heartless?" my mother demanded, her face flushing. "Your own sister How can you expect me to give up everything I worked so hard for? I persisted. Why doesn't Lily work? Why doesn't she save? Why does everything always seem so easy to her? The whispers at the table grew louder, and my family exchanged glances as if I had just broken an age-old taboo. You've always been like this, Mom spat, always thought only of yourself. I'm not giving her my apartment, I said, each word like stone. End of discussion. What happened next still plays in my head in slow motion. Mom, her face twisted in anger, grabbed the cake, the chocolate one with cream that I had brought at her request, and threw it at my face with unexpected force. It hit me square in the forehead, the cake crumbling, frosting running down my cheeks and neck, clinging to my blouse like a sticky reminder of how much I meant to her. The room froze, no one moved. I slowly wiped the frosting off my eyelashes, letting the cake fall to the floor. Dad and Lily didn't look shocked. On the contrary, they seemed satisfied, like it was expected, like I finally got what I deserved. Without a word, I grabbed my purse, my keys, and headed for the exit. Chocolate stains still clinging to my hair, my collar, my wrists. Behind me, I heard a scream. Selfish. It was my mother's voice. We have to disown you. Dad added, how could you do this to me? Lily was sobbing, but I didn't turn around. I got into the car, my hands shaking so much I could barely put the key in the ignition. But somehow I made it home, where it still smelled of paint and where the walls, even bare ones, were more honest than the people at that table. I collapsed on my old, second-hand couch, the same one I'd rented 5 years ago, and tried to process what had happened. The phone in my purse started shaking almost immediately. Messages and calls from my parents and Lily crashed down on me like an avalanche, mercilessly burying the last remnants of calm. The phone screen was bursting with notifications. You're acting ridiculous, just give her the apartment. I can't believe how selfish you are right now, said one message after another, and I caught myself thinking that I was reading them not with the eyes of an adult woman, but as if I had again become that little girl who was being explained why her desires were always less important than Lily's. After everything we've done for you, your pregnant sister needs a home, my mother wrote, as if not noticing the desperate persistence with which she continued to destroy my sense of belonging to this family. I turned off the phone and threw it aside with relief, as if it were the source of poison that was seeping into my blood through the screen. What have they done for me? This thought did not leave, like a nail driven deep into my consciousness. My whole life, I've been the second one, the shadow, the compliment, the one who always gives in, adapts, waits for others to be more comfortable. When we were kids and we both needed new clothes for school, Lily would shop for designer jeans, shirts, shoes, all with tags, all from glossy catalogs, while I'd settle for whatever was on sale, where the clothes were from previous seasons and out of size. When we both applied to summer camps, Mom and Dad found the money for Lily's art camp, but I was told that debate camp was too expensive for 1 week, as if my passion and my dreams were worth less. For her 16th birthday, they threw a party with a DJ, a light show, and a 3-tiered cake, and for mine, Mom baked a cake and invited 2 aunties, and it was a family holiday that I was supposed to appreciate. And now they expected me to simply give her my apartment, the one thing I had achieved entirely on my own, a place I had invested not just my money but my heart in, my work, my patience, my strength. I thought about the house we had sat in just an hour ago, my grandmother's house, the woman who alone seemed to love me unconditionally, the house she had bequeathed to Lily and me equally, and I had let my parents stay there. We had both let them, out of kindness, out of respect, without asking for payment, recognition, or gratitude. I owned half of that house, as did Lily, and suddenly, amidst all the chaos, the insults, the reproaches and sweet insults, I realized what exactly I needed to do. The next morning, I woke up not with a heaviness in my chest, but with a clear sense of purpose, as if something had finally aligned inside. I opened my old filing cabinet, heavy and creaky but sturdy, and shuffled through the folders until I found one with the words Grandma's will written on it in ink. Inside was a document confirming what I already knew. Lily and I were equal owners. We each owned 50% of the house. My parents were there not by right of ownership, but by our free will, and that was important. That changed everything. I was about to dial my lawyer's number when my phone vibrated again. It was a notification from a social network. My mother had tagged me in a post. With a growing sense of unease, I opened the app and almost dropped the phone. A post appeared on the screen like a scroll with a sentence. It pains me to say this, but sometimes family disappoints you in the worst ways. Yesterday, my daughter Hannah refused to help her pregnant sister Lily when she needed it most. Despite having the resources, Hannah chose selfishness over family. As a mother, I have never been so heartbroken. Please pray that Hannah will find compassion in her heart. The post quickly racked up comments, and almost all of them felt like punches into an open wound. I was there. Hannah was terribly cruel to poor Lily, one cousin wrote. Some people just don't understand what family is, a neighbor I barely knew added, kept the apartment to herself while her sister was pregnant, disgraceful. Wrote a family friend I'd only met 3 times in my life. Not one person, not one, mentioned that my mom had thrown a cake at me. Not one questioned why I should ever give up the apartment I'd earned. I scrolled through the comments, and each one was like a new blow. Each word a cold blade to the chest, and the worst part was that my mom liked and responded to the most vitriolic of them. She wasn't just trying to shame me, she was launching a public shaming campaign, and in that moment, in that icy silence, something inside me broke, something completely and irrevocably. The last thread that connected me to the illusion of family affection snapped. I picked up my phone and opened a browser. I found a list of law firms in the area and chose the first one with good reviews, Blackwell Law Office. The secretary's voice was polite, slightly surprised. I need to talk to a lawyer about property rights, I said in a surprisingly calm voice, as if I were talking about the weather. 2 hours later, I was sitting in a spacious office, across from Jeremy Blackwell, a perceptive, attentive man in his 50s with gray temples and a deep, calm voice. He didn't interrupt, just listened while I told him everything from a chocolate cake to a social media post, and when I finished, he leaned forward slightly, resting his hands on the table, and said, "Let me get this straight. You and your sister inherited the house from your grandmother," Jeremy began, flipping through the pages of the document with a businesslike yet attentive expression, as if each word in the will carried the weight of a death sentence. You gave your parents permission to live there, rent-free, no contract, no payment, entirely at your own discretion. Now, after they demanded that you give it to your sister, and publicly humiliated you when you refused, you want to know what your options are with the house? He looked up from the papers and peered at me over the top of his glasses. Yes, I nodded, feeling my insides tighten with a mixture of anxiety and determination. I don't want to get revenge, but they haven't shown me any respect or consideration. I need to know what my rights are. Jeremy folded the papers neatly, tapped them with his fingers, and nodded. That's clear. You and your sister each own 50% of the property. You can request that the house be sold at any time and the proceeds split between you and your sister. I leaned forward slightly. What's the process? I asked, as if this were a business transaction unrelated to the most painful of ties. I'll draw up a formal notice of your intent to sell your half of the property, he continued. Your sister can either buy you out at fair market value, or we'll have to sell the entire house and split the proceeds. Your parents have no legal say in the matter. I took a deep breath and let it out, as if I'd finally regained my voice. Do it, I said. His nod was calm and businesslike, but there was something about it that said, you're on the right track. Over the next few days, I threw myself deliberately into renovating my apartment. I finished painting the living room. The soft gray I'd spent almost a week choosing was just right, calm, understated, but not boring. Then I set about removing the old carpet, dusty, threadbare, smelling of other people's lives. Physical labor had become more than just a task for me. It was an escape, a way to let out the pent-up pain, to distract myself from my thoughts, to feel in control again. I temporarily blocked all their numbers. I needed space, I needed silence, not filled with accusations, but full of clarity and peace. 5 days after meeting Jeremy, my doorbell rang. I went to the peephole and froze. My parents, Lily and Kevin, were standing outside. I didn't open the door. Hannah, we know you're in there, my mother shouted, her voice demanding, without the slightest sign of remorse. Open the door right now. We need to talk about this ridiculous letter, my father added. Louder this time. I said nothing. Didn't move, just slowly pressed the record button on my phone, launching the voice memo app. Their voices echoed down the hall, bursting through the door. You're ungrateful, my mother screamed. After everything we've done for you, you're trying to make your pregnant sister homeless. Lily's voice was shaking, but there was no fear or pain in it, only feigned indignation. that's low, even for you," Kevin added, as if they'd rehearsed it beforehand. I sat in my living room, my phone next to me, and I recorded everything, every word, every threat, every insult they hurled at my door for almost 15 minutes before they finally gave in and left. The next day, I forwarded the recording to Jeremy. He called back almost immediately. "This is harassment," he said firmly, leaving no room for doubt. "We can apply for a restraining order if necessary, but more importantly, their behavior only strengthens our case. They have clearly demonstrated hostility toward you." His words weren't just reassuring, they confirmed what I felt. I had a right, I wasn't a monster, I was simply defending myself. A week later, Jeremy called again. "Your parents' lawyer has reached out to you," he said. "They want to mediate. The mediation is scheduled for next Monday, here in my office." I arrived early the day of the meeting. My navy pantsuit was impeccable, the same one I wore only for the most important business meetings. I pulled my hair back into a neat bun, and when I looked at my reflection in the glass door, I saw not a frightened daughter, not a sister in the background of someone else's life, but a grown woman who was no longer prepared to remain silent. Jeremy greeted me with a confidence that gave me strength. "Remember, you have every legal right to do this," he said, placing his hand on my shoulder. "Don't let them make you feel guilty." My parents, Lily and Kevin, arrived, accompanied by their lawyer. My mother looked at me, and there was no remorse or pain in her eyes, only contempt. "Traitor," she hissed as she passed. The negotiations began. My parents' lawyer spoke first, laying out their position. Selling the house would create undue hardship for a pregnant daughter and elderly parents. Jeremy, without flinching, presented evidence, an audio recording, screenshots of social media posts and comments, testifying to their attitude towards me. For almost 2 hours, the negotiations went in a vicious circle. They sometimes asked, sometimes manipulated, sometimes accused. Then the lawyers retired for a confidential discussion. I sat there, feeling my pulse pounding in my temples, my heart pounding in my ribs. When they returned, they laid out the outcome. The house would be sold, and the proceeds would be divided equally between Lily and me, in strict accordance with our grandmother's will. I nodded. My mother burst into tears. "Please, Hannah," she sobbed, and her voice suddenly became weak, trembling, almost childish, as if a second before there had not been all this rage, contempt, words with which she burned me alive. "We are your family, how can you do this to us?" She looked at me, her eyes red from tears, her face pale, and her voice broke when she added, "I'm sorry that the cake got ruined." I lost my temper. I watched her silently, and in those seconds, dozens of scenes emerged in my memory, one after another. Her harsh words as a teenager, her eternal preference for Lily, her smile addressed to her sister. In those moments when I wanted at least a little warmth, I remembered how I always silently agreed to be second, to give in, to adapt, how I silently accepted their rules of the game, how I hid my tears in the pillow and learned not to expect gratitude if only there was peace. I remembered the social media post, the public shaming she had put me through with such gusto, the threats at the door, the accusations that I was the enemy, and the demand that I give up everything I had worked for, as if this was not my life but their project. I sighed and answered quietly but firmly, "The house will be sold, that's it, that's final." Jeremy nodded and immediately began drawing up the settlement agreement, his movements precise as a surgeon's. And I sat in the chair, feeling the weight of their hatred hanging in the air like a damp blanket. But now I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I could stand up for myself and not apologize for it. For the first time, I felt like I didn't have to be convenient, kind, suitable. 2 months flew by almost unnoticed, dissolving into an endless series of legal formalities, property viewings, appraisals, and paperwork. The house sold faster than we expected. The area was coveted, and the house, despite its age, had its own appeal: a garden, a farmhouse kitchen, antique wood floors. After expenses, closing costs, and fees, Lily and I each received $175,000, a hefty sum, ironically enough, from a house that, as I had once been told, is more important to a family than money. During this time, I had never spoken directly to the family. All communication had been through lawyers. Dryly, formally, as if between strangers. From Jeremy, I learned that my parents were furious, but ultimately unable to stop the sale. Legally, they had no rights. They had lived in a house that wasn't theirs for years, without having contributed a cent to its upkeep beyond the most basic repairs, and it was a fact they couldn't escape. What are they going to do now? I asked Jeremy the last time we met, sitting in his cozy office with its dark wood paneling and the smell of coffee and paper, like a library. Your sister decided to use her share of the property as a down payment on a new house, he answered calmly. Your parents are moving in with her and Kevin. They've taken out a mortgage for the rest. I nodded, unsure what to feel. Part of me, the one that still held on to the old loyalty, felt guilty. I'd basically kicked my parents out of the house they'd lived in for half their lives. But the other part, the one that remembered the pie in the face, the posts, the screams at the door, felt like I'd done the right thing, the fair thing, without vengeance, but with boundaries. And you? Jeremy asked, looking at me with genuine interest. Any plans for your stock portfolio? I smiled slightly. I'm working with a financial advisor to build a diversified portfolio, stocks, bonds, real estate, mutual funds, I said, and just saying those words made me feel like a grown-up, confident woman in control of her own life. Smart move, he said approvingly. Well, unless otherwise stated, I guess we're out of business. We shook hands. Thank you for everything, I said, and as I walked out of his office, I felt as if a weight I'd carried for years, the burden of being responsible for other people's emotions, the willingness to give in, to lend a shoulder even when I had nothing to lean on, had been lifted from my body, my shoulders, my very breath. Back in my apartment, I looked around at all I'd accomplished in these months. The renovation was almost complete. The carpet had been replaced with warm wooden floors, every room had been freshly painted, the kitchen gleamed with a new stove and fridge, and the light fixtures I had chosen with such care filled the apartment with a soft, cozy light. It was no longer just a home, it was my space, a reflection of me, my taste, my decisions, my freedom. The phone rang. On the screen was Sarah, my colleague. Hi, Sarah, I answered. Hannah, how are you? There was concern in her voice, the real kind from someone who had seen me the day I showed up for work with cream in my hair and tears in my eyes. We briefly discussed the family drama. I had told her a little when I came to Red Eyes after the cake incident, and she had simply been there, without asking unnecessary questions. I'm fine, I said, and as I said it, I suddenly realized, it was true, the sale was complete, the money was in the account. And your family? Sarah asked cautiously. I sighed. That part is still a mess. I haven't spoken to any of them. I'd heard things from mutual friends, brief mentions over smoke breaks, second-hand gossip, snippets of news that had slipped through my silence. Lily's wedding was last month, one of my coworkers said casually, unsure of how I'd react, and when I remained silent, she quickly added, a small ceremony, just immediate family. I paused, letting the words settle in my mind like dust on an old table. I had obviously not been invited. Sarah, who'd heard our conversation, whispered softly, sorry, Hannah. I shook my head, composed, calm. I wouldn't have gone anyway, and to my surprise, I realized, I meant it. Lily is due next week. It looks like a boy, in another life, in another family. It might have been a big deal, a nephew, tiny socks, warm milk in a bottle, a baby's laughter and first smile, but not here. And you're really okay with all this? Sarah asked, leaning closer, not seeing my nephew. I thought for a moment. I imagined him growing up, my name mentioned at family dinners, if they had any, casually, reluctantly, with a wry expression. He would grow up thinking I was the villain, the evil Aunt Hannah who wouldn't give them her apartment and forced the family to sell Grandma's house. They wouldn't think to tell him how they treated me my whole life, how they threw me out the door, how they threw cake in my face, how they declared me the enemy simply because I refused to be a victim. Sarah was silent, letting me digest this. Families are complicated, she said quietly. That's putting it mildly, I said, and laughed mirthlessly. You know, it's not just the apartment, it's not the money, it's not the baby, it's that I don't think they ever really considered me part of the family. I was someone convenient, useful, someone to be sacrificed when necessary, not a favorite daughter, not an equal sister, just a resource, a convenient shadow. She nodded, and then, after a brief pause, asked the question I'd asked myself many times. Do you think you'll ever make peace with them? I looked out the window, where the evening sun cast long shadows on the neighboring houses, and said, no, not until they admit what they did and sincerely apologize. And I knew that would never happen. My parents are 60, they've been kind to Lily all their lives. I doubt they'll suddenly realize. After I hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine and stepped out onto the balcony. the sun was setting. The sky ablaze with shades of amber and rose gold and dusty lilac, and there was something startlingly quiet, honest, about the evening, as if even the day itself had acknowledged my weariness and given me a break. 6 months ago, if someone had told me I'd be pulling away from my entire family, I probably would have felt devastated, I'd have cried, I'd have felt guilty, I'd have doubted, but now, standing there, barefoot, with a drink in my hand, I felt strangely at peace. My phone buzzed with a new text. A mutual friend, Lily had given birth, 7 pounds 6 ounces, everyone was fine. I stared at the screen, waiting to feel anything, sadness, anger, regret, but all I felt was a distant acknowledgement, as if I were hearing about the life of a distant acquaintance, not my own sister. I knew they were all living together now, Lily, Kevin, the baby, my parents, in a house bought with Lily's share and a 30-year mortgage. They would pay it off until retirement, and perhaps beyond, but even knowing that, I couldn't find an ounce of pity in myself. They had made it clear to me who I was in their eyes, not a daughter, not a sister, not an aunt, just a resource, a wallet, a purse, I thought, with cake dripping down its face. My apartment was quiet when I came back inside. Some might call it loneliness, but I called it peace. Walls I'd painted with my own hands, floors I'd laid myself, a kitchen where everything was exactly where I wanted it. Every inch of that space spoke of me, my freedom, my independence, my right to say no. On the bookshelf sat a small box, old cedar, with worn edges, containing the only photographs I had kept, me and Grandma. She was the only person in my family who treated Lily and me equally. Maybe she saw how I was being treated, maybe she understood, albeit silently, and was trying to balance the scales, leaving us equal shares. I reached out, touched the lid of the box, and quietly whispered, "Thank you, Grandma." As for the others, I felt no desire or need to reach out to them. The ball was in their court, and, frankly, I suspected it would stay there forever. I was tired of sacrificing for those who weren't willing to do the same for me. I always thought family was unconditional love and support, but now I realized that real family, whether blood or found, never asks you to set yourself on fire to keep them warm. They don't throw pie in your face if you say no. They say, "Burn," and walk away. My phone was silent. No calls from my mother begging for forgiveness, no texts from my father admitting his bias, no line from Lily thanking me for the years I'd spent in her shadow. And you know what? It was beautiful. I had an apartment, I had investments, a career, friends who actually cared about me. I had a life that I'd built myself, brick by brick, dollar by dollar, and for the first time in a long time, maybe the first time in my life, it was truly mine.